In a jaw-dropping exclusive, Lisa Weiss steps forward with a bombshell revelation that shatters everything we thought we knew about Doug Weiss and Joni Lamb. As the truth unravels, dark secrets are exposed, threatening to collapse the very foundation of their powerful empire. What Lisa reveals will leave you speechless and questioning everything. Prepare for a shocking truth that no one saw coming. This is the explosive story that could change everything. Stay tuned. Lisa Weiss had kept silent for years, watching from the sidelines as her ex-husband, Doug Weiss, built his career as a well-known marriage expert. For decades, Doug had been the face of healthy relationships, teaching people about love, commitment, and the sanctity of marriage. He'd built an entire public image around helping others fix their marriages, often touting the importance of loyalty and faithfulness. But behind closed doors, Lisa's reality was far different from the picture Doug painted for the world. She had lived through the quiet pain of a slowly disintegrating marriage, feeling more and more invisible as Doug became consumed by his career. She stood by his side for years, supporting his work, but in the end, it was clear that he wasn't as invested in their relationship as she was. When Lisa finally found the courage to speak out, her words shocked everyone. She revealed the truth about what had been happening in their marriage, peeling back the layers of secrecy that had kept her pain hidden for so long. The picture she painted wasn't just one of a failed marriage, it was a deeper betrayal. Lisa spoke about the emotional distance that had grown between them over the years, how Doug became more focused on his public persona than on his role as a husband. She wasn't just dealing with a simple disagreement or a single fight, it was a long drawn-out process of being ignored and left behind. But the real bombshell came when Lisa addressed Doug's quick remarriage to Joni Lamb. Just months after their divorce, Doug married Joni, a woman he had known for years in professional Christian circles. The speed of it all left Lisa in disbelief. How could someone who preached the value of commitment and patience in marriage move on so quickly? Lisa didn't just talk about the hurt of losing her husband, she uncovered a tangled web of secrets, questioning whether Doug and Joni had already been emotionally involved before their official separation. The timeline of their relationship was murky, and Lisa wasn't afraid to ask the difficult questions. What had really been going on behind the scenes? Had their connection been brewing long before the public divorce? Her revelation shattered the illusion of the perfect marriage that Doug had worked so hard to project. The public had seen them as the ideal couple, the ones who had it all figured out. But Lisa's words turned that image upside down, revealing a painful reality that no one had expected. She didn't just expose her personal hurt, she uncovered a story of secrets, hidden relationships, and the emotional turmoil that had been bubbling beneath the surface for years. It was a statement that not only challenged everything people thought they knew about Doug and Joni, but also forced them to reconsider the authenticity of Doug's public persona. And for Lisa, speaking out was her way of finally reclaiming her voice, after years of living in the shadow of a man who had made a career out of helping others fix their relationships, all while letting his own fall apart.
Destroying us, he's destroying me. And I said, no, Joni, something very bad has happened. And there's been an essay and all of this. Oh, no. And then she defended Pete. He's hurt Pete so much. The Pete that Rebecca and JW wrote a huge letter about. That Pete. The Pete that Rebecca and JW won't let into their home. That Pete is a good guy. She said that Susie was a pathological liar, and that she had made these accusations against a very nice man, the chiropractor, who is deceased now, but has a record and attacked her. So I was in shock what Joni was saying to me. I implored her. I said, please reconcile with Jonathan for yourself. That would be the hope. I saw that side of her. I can only say it's nothing like the Joni on television. It's nothing like that sweet person. But I did see that person somewhat in the video where she was talking about Jonathan has been conducting a smear campaign. And I'm like, what are you talking about? I hadn't seen Jonathan conducting a smear campaign. I'd seen Jonathan in terms.
Doug and Lisa Weiss's marriage had once seemed like the ideal Christian partnership. For over 30 years, they had built a life together, raised children, and weathered many of life's storms. Doug had been her partner, her best friend, and someone she trusted deeply. Together, they had faced the ups and downs of life, job changes, moves, raising a family, and they had come through it all. Or so it seemed. From the outside, they looked like the perfect couple. Doug was a respected figure in marriage counseling, a man who had helped thousands of people fix their relationships. He was seen as an expert, someone who had it all figured out. And Lisa, always by his side, appeared to be the supportive, loving wife who helped him build that image. Together, they made a great team, or at least, that's what everyone thought. But behind closed doors, things weren't as perfect as they appeared. It didn't happen overnight. It wasn't a sudden fight or an explosive argument. No, it was the slow, steady erosion of their connection that Lisa would later come to realize. Over time, Doug's focus began to shift. As his career took off and his reputation as a marriage expert grew, Lisa found herself slowly pushed to the sidelines. Doug had always been passionate about his work, but over the years it became clear that his career was taking up more and more of his time. The late nights, the travel for speaking engagements, the growing demands of his ministry, it all started to take a toll on their marriage. At first, Lisa tried to convince herself that it was just a phase. She told herself that everything would be okay. She loved Doug, and she believed in their marriage. But as the years went by, she began to feel invisible. Doug, once so emotionally present, was now distant. He was always busy, always on the go. When he was home, he wasn't really there. His mind was consumed by his work, by his public image, by the demands of his career. Lisa, on the other hand, was left at home, feeling more and more disconnected from the man she had once known so well. It wasn't about one big fight. It was the little things, the missed conversations, the ignored gestures, the absence of affection, that built up over time. And the worst part was that no one knew. No one saw the cracks in their marriage. On the outside, they still looked like the perfect couple, but inside things were falling apart. Lisa began to feel as though she was losing Doug, but she didn't know how to get him back. She reached out to him, tried to make things work, but he was always too busy, too focused on his career. The emotional distance between them grew wider and wider, and no matter how much Lisa tried to reach him, it felt like Doug was slipping further away. The man she had built a life with, the man who had once been so present, was becoming a stranger to her. It wasn't just the physical absence, though that was part of it. It was the emotional disconnect that hurt the most. She missed the man who had been her partner, the one who had shared her dreams and fears. Now she was left alone with her thoughts, wondering what had gone wrong. In the quiet moments, Lisa would reflect on the early days of their marriage, when everything had felt so right, when Doug had been there for her, when they had shared their hopes for the future, when they had built a life together. She remembered how they had talked about growing old together, how they had dreamed of the future they would share. But now, those dreams felt so far away. As the years passed, Lisa began to wonder if she was still the woman Doug had fallen in love with. She didn't recognize the man he had become, and worse, she didn't recognize the woman she had become in the process. She had spent so many years putting Doug and his career first that she had lost herself. She had become so wrapped up in supporting him that she had forgotten to take care of her own needs, her own heart. But it wasn't just the distance that caused the breakdown. It was the slow realization that Doug had changed. The man she had married wasn't the same man anymore. His focus had shifted, and his priorities no longer aligned with hers. Where they once had shared dreams, they now had different visions for the future. Doug was so focused on building his public persona that he seemed to forget about the woman who had stood by him through thick and thin. Lisa had always supported him, always been there for him, but it felt like Doug no longer saw her, no longer valued her the way he once had. Lisa tried to hold on, tried to make things work, but it became harder and harder to do so. She tried to keep the spark alive, to bring back the connection they once had, but Doug was always too busy, too focused on his work, and as the emotional distance between them grew, Lisa began to feel more alone than ever. She was no longer just his wife, she was his shadow, the person who supported him from behind the scenes but who was rarely seen or heard. The breaking point came when Doug remarried Joni Lamb just months after their divorce. Lisa was blindsided by how quickly everything had happened. One minute she was still processing the end of a 30-year marriage, and the next, Doug was moving on with someone else. It felt like a slap in the face. How could Doug, the man who had preached so often about the sanctity of marriage, move on so quickly? Lisa was left to process the fact that the man she had spent her life with had started a new chapter with someone else, and she couldn't help but feel betrayed by the speed of it all. It wasn't just the remarriage that hurt. It was the realization that Doug had moved on without giving their marriage the time or attention it needed to heal. It felt like he had thrown away everything they had built together without a second thought. For Lisa, the pain wasn't just about losing Doug. It was about losing herself. The woman she had been for so many years, the woman who had stood by Doug's side, had been forgotten in the process. She had spent so many years supporting Doug, helping him build his career, and now, as everything fell apart, she was left with nothing. It was as if the life they had built together no longer mattered. And that realization was the hardest part of all. Looking back, Lisa saw the cracks in their marriage more clearly. It wasn't one big thing that caused their marriage to fail. It was a series of small things, a gradual erosion of the connection they once shared. It was the slow drift, the emotional disconnection, the neglect that had built up over time. By the time Doug remarried Joni, it was clear that their marriage had been over for much longer than either of them had realized. And for Lisa, it wasn't just about the loss of Doug. It was about the loss of everything they had once dreamed of together. She had given so much of herself to their marriage, and now, it felt like it was all for nothing. Divorce was never easy, but for Lisa, it felt like a betrayal. She had spent years building a life with Doug, and now she was left to pick up the pieces. The breakdown of their marriage wasn't just about the end of a relationship. It was about the end of a dream, the loss of the future they had planned together. And that was the hardest part to bear. Lisa sat in disbelief as she stared at the headlines. Doug had remarried Joni Lamb, just months after their divorce. It was like a slap in the face, a gut-wrenching blow that she never saw coming. The speed with which Doug moved on left her stunned. For over 30 years, she had stood by his side, supported him through the highs and lows of life. She had been his partner in every sense of the word. They built a life together, raised children, and weathered the storms that life threw their way. They had dreamed about growing old together. Yet, here she was, left behind, while Doug quickly turned the page and started a new chapter with someone else. The timing alone was enough to make Lisa feel betrayed. They had just finalized their divorce, and in what seemed like the blink of an eye, Doug had moved on to marry Joni. Lisa felt as though the years they had spent together, all the memories and moments they had shared, didn't matter anymore. The man she had loved for so long, the man she had built a life with, was now gone, replaced by Joni, a woman who was once a colleague, a professional associate within the same Christian circles. To Lisa, it felt like a betrayal not just of their marriage, but of everything they had worked for and built together. Lisa had known that their marriage was struggling. She had felt the emotional distance growing between them for years. But this rapid remarriage made the pain of their divorce even more real. The man she had spent 3 decades with had moved on, as if their life together had been nothing more than a chapter in a book that was now closed. It wasn't just that Doug had remarried, it was the speed of it. The ease with which he had moved forward while Lisa was left to pick up the pieces of her shattered world. The hardest part was that Doug's remarriage wasn't just an emotional blow. It felt like a public display of their failure. Doug had spent his career preaching about love, commitment, and the sanctity of marriage. He had built a career around helping couples fix their relationships, offering advice and guidance on how to stay committed, how to work through problems. Yet here he was, moving on so quickly, leaving Lisa behind without a second thought. Lisa couldn't help but wonder, how could Doug, the man who had spent his life counseling others on marriage, throw away everything they had worked for so easily? There were moments when Lisa couldn't understand how Doug could do this to her. They had shared so much over the years. They had built a family, a ministry, and a future together. And yet, in a matter of months, it seemed like all of that was erased. Doug had preached patience, commitment, and faithfulness, but none of those principles seemed to apply to his own life. It was as though the man she had loved for so long had been replaced by a stranger, someone who had no problem turning the page so quickly. What made it even harder was the public nature of Doug's remarriage. The world was watching as Doug and Joni's relationship played out in front of the cameras. Lisa had spent so many years supporting Doug, standing by his side as he built his career and public image. And now, she was forced to watch as he moved on so easily, as if she had never been part of the picture. The media coverage of Doug's remarriage only added to the pain. It was as if Lisa's entire life was now being scrutinized and picked apart by strangers who had no idea what she was going through. The questions, the rumors, the judgment, it all felt like a weight she couldn't escape. It wasn't just the speed of the remarriage that hurt Lisa. It was the feeling of being replaced. Doug and Joni's relationship wasn't just new. It felt like a betrayal. Joni wasn't just anyone. She was a woman who had been a part of their lives for years. She had worked alongside Doug, had been in the same circles, and now she was his new wife. Lisa couldn't help but feel as though Doug had found someone who was easier. Someone who was more willing to fit into the life he had created. She was left behind, alone, and devastated by the way everything had played out. The emotional pain of seeing Doug move on so quickly was compounded by the fact that Lisa had spent years trying to save their marriage. She had put so much effort into making things work, to reconnecting with Doug, to holding on to the life they had built together. And yet, in the end, it felt like all of that effort had been in vain. Doug had decided that their marriage was over, and he had moved on, without any real explanation, without any attempt to work through their issues. It felt as though he had made the decision for both of them, and Lisa was left to pick up the pieces of her broken heart. The pain of Doug's remarriage also made Lisa question her own worth. For years, she had been the supportive wife, the one who stood by his side, helped him build his career, and worked to keep their family together. But now, it felt like none of that mattered. Lisa wasn't just losing her husband, she was losing her identity. She had spent so many years being Doug's wife, and now she was faced with the reality of being alone. The woman who had once been the center of Doug's world was now a distant memory, and Lisa couldn't help but feel forgotten. There were moments when Lisa found herself questioning everything. Had Doug ever truly loved her, or had she just been part of the story he had built for himself? How could someone who had spent so many years talking about commitment and faithfulness so easily walk away from their marriage? The questions kept piling up, and Lisa struggled to make sense of it all. She was left to confront the painful reality that Doug had moved on without looking back, and the hurt she felt seemed impossible to shake. What made the situation even more complicated was the fact that Lisa wasn't just dealing with the loss of a marriage, she was also dealing with the loss of a dream. For so long she had believed in the future they had planned together. She had believed in Doug, in the life they had built, in the love they had shared. And now, all of that seemed to have been tossed aside in favor of a new life with Joni. Lisa was left to wonder what had gone wrong, what she had missed, and why Doug hadn't fought for their marriage as hard as she had. But the pain of Doug's remarriage wasn't just about Lisa's feelings of betrayal. It was also about the questions it raised for their children and their friends. Doug had always been the model of commitment and stability, a man who helped other couples save their marriages. But now, he was the man who had discarded his own marriage in the blink of an eye. How could his children reconcile the man they had known with the man who had so easily moved on to a new relationship? How could their friends, who had looked up to Doug for so many years, understand what had happened? The emotional toll of Doug's remarriage extended far beyond Lisa. It affected everyone who had been a part of their lives. For Lisa, the hardest part of Doug's rapid remarriage was the feeling of being left behind. The speed with which Doug had moved on made it seem like their marriage had never mattered, like all the years they had spent together meant nothing. It was as if she had been erased from his life, replaced by Joni in the blink of an eye. And that hurt more than anything. It wasn't just the loss of a husband, it was the loss of a life, a future, and an identity. Lisa was left to rebuild, to find herself again in the wreckage of a marriage that had once been everything. As the media coverage of Doug and Joni's remarriage continued, Lisa was left to navigate the complicated emotions that came with seeing her former life played out in front of the world. She had to face the reality that Doug had moved on, but she also had to confront the painful truth that she was no longer part of the life they had shared. The emotional toll of Doug's rapid remarriage was something Lisa would carry with her for a long time, but over time, she learned to heal. She learned to rebuild her life, to find peace in the midst of the pain, and to move forward, even when it seemed like everything had been ripped apart. The emotional and public fallout from Doug and Joni's remarriage hit Lisa harder than she ever expected. After years of trying to make her marriage work, after decades of building a life with Doug, everything seemed to be falling apart in an instant. The divorce had been painful enough, but the speed with which Doug moved on to marry Joni Lamb left her feeling blindsided. The public spectacle of their rapid remarriage only amplified the pain, turning her private heartbreak into something for the world to watch and scrutinize. For Lisa, the emotional toll was overwhelming. She had always been the supportive wife, standing by Doug's side as he built his career as a marriage expert. But now, as the world watched Doug and Joni start their new life together, Lisa was left in the shadows, trying to pick up the pieces of her own life. It felt like everything she had known and loved had been ripped away. Doug had been her partner for so long, and now, just months after their divorce, he was with someone else. The speed of it all felt like a betrayal, not just personally, but in front of the world. How could Doug, who had spent his career preaching about love and commitment, so easily move on? The public's reaction to Doug and Joni's remarriage only made things harder for Lisa. She had always known that people admired Doug, that he was seen as a role model for relationships. But now, that image seemed to be crumbling. The questions were inevitable. How could someone who had spent so much of his life talking about the importance of marriage and commitment so quickly throw it all away? The media jumped on the story, making it a headline that everyone talked about. People were curious, asking if Doug and Joni's relationship had started before his marriage to Lisa ended. The rumors and gossip spread like wildfire, and Lisa found herself caught in the middle of a storm she never wanted to be part of. It wasn't just the media attention that hurt. It was the way it made Lisa feel, like her entire life was being scrutinized. She wasn't just dealing with the pain of losing a husband. She was dealing with the pain of having that loss exposed for the world to see. Every detail of her personal life, every moment of heartbreak, was now public knowledge. It was as if the pain she had kept hidden for so long was now being paraded in front of strangers who had no idea what she was truly going through. The judgment from others was unbearable. People she didn't even know began to form opinions about her marriage, about her life, and it felt like the world was watching her fail. For Lisa, the hardest part of it all was the sense of abandonment. Not only had Doug moved on so quickly, but now it seemed like everyone else had moved on as well. The public, Doug's colleagues, even their friends, they all seemed to accept the new reality without hesitation. It was like Lisa's pain didn't matter, like the life they had built together didn't matter. Doug had remarried Joni so quickly that it felt as though their years together had been erased. Lisa was left to face the fact that the man she had shared her life with, the father of her children, had moved on without even looking back. She felt invisible, left to deal with her emotional struggles on her own, while the world moved on without her. And then there was the impact on their children. Lisa had spent years raising her family with Doug, guiding them through the ups and downs of life. They had built a family together, shared memories, and dreamed about the future. But now, that family was fractured. Their children were caught in the middle of their divorce, trying to make sense of a situation they didn't ask for. For Lisa, it was painful to see how the divorce and Doug's remarriage affected them. They were old enough to understand what was happening, and they, too, were left to grapple with the confusion of their father's quick remarriage. It was as though the foundation of their family had been ripped apart, and now Lisa was left to pick up the pieces for both herself and her children. As the days went by, the emotional strain continued to wear on Lisa. It wasn't just about the loss of Doug. It was about the loss of her identity. For so many years, she had been Doug's partner. She had been there for him, supported him, helped him build his career. But now, she was no longer the woman who stood beside him. She was the ex-wife, the one left behind while he moved forward. The identity she had built for herself was tied to her marriage, and now it was all in question. Who was she without Doug? What was her purpose, now that the life she had envisioned for so long was gone?